Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. This is our 54th webinar in our series that we started since March, and we've been having just a great time. Tons and tons of technical sessions, lots of good questions answered, and this one here today is going to be a little bit different. We've got we're still going to talk about data. We're still going to have a good time, but maybe not quite so technical. More so maybe some good data stories. We've got our guest for today is Tommy Kendall, and I'm gonna jump to the next slide. Tommy was gracious enough to give us a little bit of his time today and come in and chat about some of the stuff that some of his background and especially kind of around the data acquisition and this whole electronics world. He grew up in it. When he started it, he didn't have a ton of it, and then as he was on his way to his through his career, ended up with race cars that had very, very heavy data systems in them. So we're going to chat about it a little bit, talk about that a little bit, and have a good time. Tommy's a very personable young man, right, Tommy? A young man, and great storyteller. So we're looking forward to this one, and to chat about a couple of different things and kind of see where it goes. You have the question and answer box over there. If there's something that you a question that you think we ought to ask Tommy, we will pull a few of them in from the question and answer box as well. So welcome, Tommy. Thank you for coming. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have a good time today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's cool what you guys are doing. It's a tremendous resource, and it's amazing. You can literally get any expert, almost any subject online now, and I think that's only been accelerated during COVID. It's certainly a silver lining there. I've been going to school myself. I've been investing for a long time, but I've really been going to school on shorter term technical trading. And so I can appreciate what you guys are doing. 54 broadcasts in that short time. That's humping it.
Yeah, it is a bit of work, but the value is large. And as I've shared with a lot of the folks that are here and sometimes our co-hosts, there has not been one yet that I haven't learned a bunch myself, and I am the guy that is out training and teaching on this software and some of this hardware. So it's been valuable across the board. So I do appreciate that. Just a little bit about Tommy as we kind of get started. Most of you know who he is, but as the bullet says here, he was big in the 90s. That was a line that was out of off of a couple of social media posts that Tommy puts up there, but he has had a Hall of Fame racing career, literally, and which is a big deal, something we'll probably ask him about today. But people only ask him about his chicken car named El Gallo. So maybe we'll chat about that a little bit. There's a picture up there in the upper corner. 1986 became the youngest IMSA champion until last year, the only double champion. That's pretty impressive, and in a very tough championship. Class winner in 1995. One of my personal favorites is endurance racing, and so of course I need to put that in there. 1995 Daytona 24 with Roush Racing. Mark Martin, Mike Brockman, Paul Newman. What a team! Very cool. Maybe a story or two about that. Almost unstoppable in TransAm and in that era of the 90s, winning 11 straight races in 1997. That was in the heyday of factory teams and powerful, good drivers. To me, that's super impressive. 5 IMSA titles, 4 TransAm titles we just talked about, and then has moved on now to become successful television broadcaster, which is pretty cool. I see yourself plus other ones that are doing similar things, and I am always impressed with how people can come out of a discipline that is totally different than that and then go into that broadcasting. Yeah, the topic, but that's a whole different world, and to progress and be so good in both of them is pretty impressive. So good for you. Anything else you'd like to add before we kind of get started?
Not really. Looking forward to it.
Perfect. How did you get started in racing when you first started? What year was that, and how did you jump into this?
Well, it's funny. I am going to definitely date myself or age myself but it's important, I think, to sort of frame things, because now you have literally the whole world at your fingertips with the internet. Back then, it was pre-internet, and so I grew up in a small suburb of LA called La Cañada, and it was a little small town, and so my point is, back then there was 3 TV channels, And I think there was maybe 2 races a year on TV. You would have maybe 3: Daytona, Indy, which was tape delayed, and then you would maybe have Monaco on the Wide World of Sports. You had 3 magazines that came out once a month, and they had a little race coverage in it. So my point is, if it didn't happen in your neighborhood, that was kind of your whole world. And so if you didn't know someone involved, you literally were never exposed to it. And so my world changed when my dad was always into cars, but never really could afford them. But we always used to look at the classified ads together, and we'd go look at some cars and so forth. And then when his business took off, he started getting indulging his love of cars. And it just so happened that a guy that had sons my age was Pete Smith from the Bob Smith Porsche Audi. And he sold Porsches to Newman, McQueen, Redford. And he would come to the Little League games with the coolest stuff. First Lamborghini Miura I ever saw was there. And to tell you how tall I was, it's a super low car. It came up to my chest. And I never forgot that car. Anyways, he started blowing in my dad's ear about buying stuff. And then eventually it led to, you ought to go racing. And my dad's like, well, racing, how do you do that? And he's like, well, you go to a racing school. And so my dad goes to this racing school, and long story short, got the bug. And so if those little coincidences don't happen, I never even, probably discover it until years later. And so I went to the first race at Sears Point, 1980. My dad had bought a car, didn't have a license yet. And Pete, now I know what Pete was thinking. Pete's like, I'll drive it for you. So Pete, and I went to an IMSA race at Sears Point, Sonoma Raceway now, and my mind was blown. And from that point on, that's literally all I could think about. And so a few years later, I got a enduro go-kart, and my deal was always tied to grades in school and so forth. And that was my sponsorship, was if I got good grades, my dad helped me race. And so that's how I got started. And so I got a late start in karts at age 15, but because my dad was, doing it, I got an early start in cars, found a loophole. You couldn't do anything until you were 18 then. And did some research and found out that the Jim Russell School Series you could do if you were 16. I think you can be 13 now, but anyways. And so I got into cars and the Russell stuff when I was 17, and then it went from there.
When did you win your first race?
I won my first race. I won my very first ever go-kart race out at Willow Springs. And I didn't, Kathy Hartman, who was a 30-time national champion, she was from Montrose. I bought one of her old karts. It was just plug and play. And I just, you lifted in an enduro, you lifted twice at Willow Springs. So it was a fast kart, and I won. But my first car race was at Riverside. First one that I won was earlier in that first season of the Jim Russell School Series. And then my first pro win would have been Laguna Seca in '86. I had, without getting into all the details of how I got there, I had driven 4 races at 85. My dad bought an older RX-7. I shared it with my brother, and we'd run the West Coast races and maybe in one endurance race. And then the next year I overheard a phone conversation that my crew chief answered the phone, and it was Clayton Cunningham, who had the dominant Malibu Grand Prix car. His driver had just signed with Chevy, was looking for a replacement. I happened to hear the phone call, another one of the fortunate occurrences. And he told him, nope, don't know of anyone, and hung up. And I'm like, who is that?
What?
Yeah. Long story short, I got in the car, and I thought I was doing great. I finished 4th at Miami, which was the best finish I'd had in one of those. And my crew chief, Dan Binks, told me right after the race, he said, how was it? I said, it was awesome. We finished 4th. He goes, it's not going to cut it. And I was just crushed. And Binks was my crew chief for my whole career, and then had a long career afterwards with Corvette Racing until this year, retiring. And so long story short, I had to up my game really fast that year. And finally we got to Laguna, where I'd done a bunch of Russell races, and it wasn't quite as dramatic as Zanardi's pass, but I passed one of the veterans for the lead going into the corkscrew, and won my first race there.
On the last lap?
It was not the last lap.
Oh, okay. But it was a pass nonetheless. And kind of the last basic question of kind of that background. Did you have a personal favorite track? Is there some that you just love to go to?
There's a handful of them. They tend to be the older school ones, but I mean, Elkhart Lake is it. I mean, I went there as a spectator. It's my favorite track to spectate at. I used to hike around with my camera and watch my dad's, and I learned a lot by watching before data. One of the main things I did is I go to every corner I could get to. And in Russell, you used to have to flag all the corners for the races you weren't racing in. And you'd get one race off to go get your gear on before you. And I learned so much watching the fast guys come through. And I did that even in the era of data. I would go out whenever it was raining. I would go out, stand in the rain, and watch all the corners that I could, just to build your book, so to speak. And so, so Elkhart's my favorite to watch, to drive, the town, all of that. Laguna Seca, the old Laguna, when they used to run super fast turn 2, turn 3. I still like the current one also.
Yeah.
Lime Rock is really short, but it's a really tough track. VIR, which was closed for the entirety of my career, I've gotten to drive. I'm not all those other tracks I know cold, thousands of laps. VIR is a hairy one, but I tend to like those, and so but I don't feel like I've really got it wired.
All of those being what you said when you first started, the old school natural terrain, type tracks. I happen to agree with that a lot. I enjoy that too. Okay, but let's jump into some data stuff, right? When did you first become aware of data in your motorsports career, and when did you first use it? What cars had it when you first started using it?
Well, it's funny. I'm gonna do a little word trick on you. The first car I drove with data acquisition, electronic data acquisition, was 1988, the Beretta, when I signed with Chevrolet, my first big factory program. But my first experience with data acquisition was in 86 and 87. And I drove for Clayton Cunningham, and I own that RX-7 now, which is the winningest IMSA car in history. At the end of my run in that car, there were 17 gauges in the car. So we were acquiring data, but the logger was me. And so, we had all the normal ones, but we had a couple unusual ones. We had a Magnahelic, an airbox pressure.
Okay.
And so we would make little changes to the cowl in this, and that there was no room. It was this big gauge, and that was over on the passenger floorboard. We had exhaust gas temperatures because that's how you tune the mixture. It was manual. It was fuel injected, but you had to adjust the mixture. So those, and then Clayton wanted 5 of those read at the very fastest point of every lap. So that was
of course.
I'm like, Clayton, I said, I can get you 1 a lap because it's always the hairiest place.
I am busy.
And I got to look down over there. And so, but that was exactly what we were doing. You were trying to solve the mysteries, you were trying to get information to verify and so forth. So when there was no one happier than me than when I drove a car with actual
when it actually recorded it, right? So you could get to it later. And that was in 88 in the factory Beretta in IMSA, I suppose, right?
Yes. And they had the electronic system. It was called Gen 1. They had Gen 2 ECUs, and it was in the ECU. And I remember when that came along thinking, this is going to solve all our questions. All the things we don't understand, it's going to be obvious. And little did I realize it was never ending, and it would just lead to more deeper questions and one of the challenges is the overwhelming amount of data and so forth. So, but it's obviously accelerated everything. It's a great driver learning tool, and it's a great, tuning tool.
Yeah, we always talk about it here as really it's that data acquisition triangle. It's the driver performance, vehicle performance, and vehicle health, right? It's those 3 things that you're trying to resolve. Do you remember the level of that data system in the Beretta? Was it just the basics of engine stuff and the driver stuff, throttle, brake pressure, or did it have shock sensors and even more in depth? Do you remember the level of it?
I don't remember exactly. It kind of runs together.
Exactly.
We had a lot of, I don't remember exactly how many sensors we had on it.
But remember, it had a lot though.
On the vehicle health part of it, at first it was just data acquisition and it was not telemetry.
Yeah.
And so I remember when we finally got telemetry, and what I used, when you're in the middle of a race, like even stock cars now, water temp, oil temp, all that stuff, you got to keep track of, and you're in the middle of a battle, and all of a sudden you look over and it's pegged, and you're like, oh God, how did I miss that? How am I going to explain it? And so it was I really enjoyed it when instead of them saying, what's the temps? I said, you tell me,
Yeah.
and so I don't remember the exact sensors we had, but it was a whole new world. And I to this day can't mount a sensor. I can't even download my own data. I don't know how to get into the program. But I really sought to understand how every system on the car worked conceptually and how they work together. And I leaned really heavily. You can't do that anymore as a young driver. You got to know how to do it all yourself. That's one of the pieces of the talent stack that's vital.
Absolutely. We have so many young carters that use our products that come up through with the Micron systems, and sometimes it's they'll bring somebody in or the dad will do it, but there's a good chunk of it where the young driver is taking a look at it and understands it and comes to our seminars and learns more about it. And it's an important part because you really need to understand the cars the cart to the car, and the better drivers understand how they work, right? Can become better drivers because of that. When you did start to use data, and obviously on a factory team after your Mazda, when you got hired in '88 and to drive the Beretta, did you come to rely on that data fairly quickly? Was it consistent? Was that something you would look at right when you'd come out of the car, or was it the data guy would look at it and come and feed you some information? How did you kind of handle data?
We would go into it right away, pretty much.
Right away.
There was the car stuff. One of the things we spent a ton of time on was gearing, and really understanding that. And I'm sure it's a lot better now, but we used to have, Binks, we used to have these from the gear guy, the miles per hour in every gear and so forth, basically these charts. And they were more or less, they were on the computer, but they weren't, you had to look at this gear and then you had to pull it up and so forth. And so it really, and then something that I learned from data is, the conventional wisdom was, and maybe it's different now with paddles, was that you would just even the gears out as much as you could. But I remember at Des Moines, the top speed was only 130 miles an hour. And so the range was only 80. And so everybody would run the 5-speed there. It's like, it's a street course and you got to do this. And I can't remember who came up with it, but it's like, I said, we're spending more time shifting than going forward. And so I ran a 3-speed there. And there's that's one thing that data helps you solve, is you have these conventional wisdom that is wrong. And so, conventional wisdom's right a lot of the time, but if you can identify the areas where it's wrong, you will make hay like nobody's business. And so that was a good example of one. It didn't seem fair. It was easier. I was working way less and it was faster. And so, you think if you got it all cammed up or whatever, you're working hard, it feels fast, you're on max and slowing down. And that's where data, you would never stumble onto it by feel. And you have to, and so that's a key area to understanding where the conventional wisdom is wrong.
Yeah, it's funny how the car can lie to your seat of the pants, right? You got that extra RPM, you've got your banging gears, your sideways, and if you sometimes just slowing down or not shifting for that particular corner, or shifting early sometimes, right? In the end, you can look at it and pretty clearly show that it was faster. But dyno can lie to you in your ears, right? Every once in a while. Pretty interesting. What did you typically, when it comes to data, what would you focus on? You'd get there, and is it one of those things where the team is looking for a set number of things? You talked about gearing already, that they were developing the car, and of course everywhere you went, the gearing would be different. So obviously that was one of them. But for you as a driver, would you look at some perceived weakness? You'd be racing out there and all of a sudden you kind of see that you're maybe not as good in the brakes in turn one or whatever it happens to be. Would you jump into the data and look at it that way, or would you compare with teammates, or how did you kind of tackle it for your driver improvement side?
Yeah, well, see, in most of my career, I didn't have a really fast teammate. And so I had to figure it out myself. Okay. And so, the old fashioned way of running around the quick guys. Mm-hmm. And I would never let people follow me. But even with teammates that aren't as quick, you could also learn stuff. I might be quicker in 11 corners out of 12, but if they're quicker than me in one, then okay. And so, from a driver aid, you'd go into, obviously, you start to learn patterns of, just the braking, the slope of the braking line, the release, like the hockey stick where you'd release and roll into the corner and some of those things. And then obviously the gain loss against either your best or your teammate. I mean, that's 101. But something that I didn't realize I did. This is not exactly your question, but that I didn't realize I did. But Doug Louth, who came straight out of school and worked with us at Roush, and then he went on. Pratt and Miller bought his little 2-man engineering firm, and he now oversees, I think, 90 engineers at Pratt and Miller, including all their NASCAR, IndyCar, all that stuff. And so Doug Doogie, we called him. Years later, after I retired, he said, you did something that no other driver I've worked with does, and it was the most helpful thing. He says, at the end of every debrief, what happens? You've got 12 corners, whether it's data or just an old track map.
Yeah.
There's, however you want to call it, 4 phases of the corner: braking, entry, mid, off. And there's 12 corners times 4. That's 48 areas, and you can complain about parts of all of them. And so you have this map filled up, and if you give that to the engineer or engineers or data people, they can go digging into all this. And the best thing you could do, and I always did, I kind of just basically, after all that, I said, if you can give me more of this, I'll go faster. Basically the most important thing to fix, because there's certain things that bother you a lot, and you can make them 100% better and it won't yield much. Yeah. Whereas you can have a problem that's terrible and you maybe only make it 10% better and it's 2/10. And so, I mean, it's a little bit like the CEO of a company. Everyone's working hard. They got their head down, smart people and so forth, but they're not working on the highest value problem. And so that's the one thing that I would give you, and start to learn, think about that way and cultivate that way of approaching. And the other thing I also did is, it's easy to mimic other people with other drivers and so forth. And it's good, it'll get you there. But when you have to do it yourself, you don't quite know what to do. Or if the circumstances change and you're in a different formula car where the limiting factor on speed is different. It might be mid-corner speed in a low horsepower car, it might be power down on a high-speed car, braking is important in all of them. But, if you don't learn it yourself, and so the way I learn is always ask why. Mimic the hell out of what the good guys are doing short term, but try to figure out why it's working. And that applies to almost anything you do in life. If you understand why, pretty soon you start being able, when you get to a high level, you'll start being able to innovate and do stuff that no one else is doing, because you're like, well, this is why this works, and this is why this works. Well, maybe this would work like this. And so, I mean, you're all doing that to some degree, but if you really formalize the why discovery, that's how, braking is an area we focused on an incredible amount. And it was probably the single biggest edge I had over my competitors in the TransAm days. If you listen to all the rumors and conspiracy theories, we had all these weird illegal systems on the car. And I used to laugh and I'd say, well, we're about 1% better in about 8 areas. Sorry about that noise. The gardener's got the weed whacker going. And we were
that 1% in 8 places better. Adds up. Yeah, that's 8%.
We were about 2% better under braking. And so, and a lot of the stuff is just working at it. One story about that, and I don't know if this probably wasn't a data story, but we were testing brakes at Road Atlanta, and we'd always try different masters for different pedal feel and different calipers, different brake pads for, not only how they clamped, but how the feel and how they, the initial spike, the modulation, just really working on it in reps. And whenever they'd put new tires on, we'd have the thing, it would be really good, and we'd put new tires on, and the car all of a sudden would get really unstable under braking, and we couldn't figure it out. We finally figured out we improved the brakes so much, we were, the rear wheels are trying to move backwards, and we were actually deflecting the frame rail at the pickup point. That's not a data acquisition. We didn't figure it out, but once we braced that, then we pushed through that barrier. And so again, asking the why, that's not exactly a data story, but identifying that braking, it almost always came back to that. I said, if you can make it better on the brakes in the big brake zones, I'm gonna gobble these guys up. And so
because
that was kind of,
because it all ends up that transition point when you're still on the throttle, they're on the brakes. There's a huge, all of a sudden there's a gap, right?
Yeah.
If you're both on the throttle and it's only a mile an hour difference, it's not as big of a change, right? So it certainly makes sense to me.
here's an actual exercise I can give guys. This is more of a driver tip, but it'll show on the data. I mentioned the slope of the decel line, and I used to just kill guys on the brake. So the steeper you don't realize, a lot of people hit it. A lot of people don't hit it as hard as you can initially, because at the higher speeds, you almost can't lock the brakes. There's so much inertia and so much going on with downforce and so forth. Probably maybe you can, but bottom line is you really need to ramp it up fast. And then a lot of people psychologically, when you get into downshifting, the corner starts coming up, you come a little bit off max without ever realizing. So an exercise I always like to do once I'm up to speed at a track and so forth is I'll dedicate a couple laps, and in the hard brake zones, it's really valuable for newer drivers. But even at a high level, I think it would, and you would just pick your brake zone and say, I'm going to throw away this lap time, and I'm going to brake where I've been braking, and I'm going to think about nothing but braking. I'm not going to think about downshifting. I'm not going to think about anything. And you will almost certainly be slowed down before the turn-in point over where you were. And so that shows you how much you were subconsciously releasing the brakes. Like it was a big deal with heel toe, because people would, they're heel toeing and they would not realize they're releasing a little bit of pressure. That's how I developed. I used to, in an H pattern car, I would skip gears so that I could have optimal braking. You're not introducing a rev change or rear wheel bias change with the downshift. And so Ayrton Senna's voice used to ring in my ears. He's like, guys that don't blip and go through every gear aren't doing it right. And I'm like, well, Senna says this is wrong, but I think it's faster. So there was a conventional wisdom thing.
Yeah, there you go.
F1 car at that level was different. But for me, and by only focusing on the braking in the brake zone, then you got to add the other pieces in, but you've identified, and then that'll show up on the slope of your braking. Yeah, you
mentioned earlier the why, right? And for the folks that are listening here, we have a little saying. The first one was that data acquisition triangle, right? Driver performance, vehicle health. And the other one we talk about a lot because this is a complex subject, and anything we can do to try to get it where it's a little bit easier to digest, even with the systems that we have nowadays that are substantially cheaper and available to everybody today, compared to what you had there, is what happened, where did it happen, why did it happen? That you should always be asking yourself those. And sometimes that why can be 4 or 5 levels deep, right? Yeah, why? Because, we were not as good on the brakes. Well, why weren't you as good on the brake? And then you continue to work that through, right, until you get to resolution. Very similar to the way that you approached it.
Well, that is, in terms of your process, asking the right questions at the right time is really vital. And I would recommend you even have checklists. People have all these life help gurus talk about journaling and your productivity journals and so forth. There's no different. Pilots with thousands of flight hours use checklists, I find, and so as simple as, okay, at the end, did I ask myself all these questions? And like you said, maybe it has multiple questions. You might have to ask 3 or 4 whys to get to what you're really working on.
And one of the biggest problems with data nowadays is you've got the what happened, where it happened, why it happened. People skip. And I don't want a checklist where you have to, check a box for everyone or put your finger on it. But boy, the first time that you do what happened and you go right to the why, and then you skip that it was on the entry to the corner, not in the exit or the middle, or and you end up with the wrong why because you've kind of shortcut the system. So we got to always be careful because we have so much information.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges is, after a session, how can you get the data, early on, getting the data into a useful form,
right,
filtering it out, this, that, and the other. But don't, just because, even with really good teams, I think that's one of the things that guys that go, or girls that go from different teams, they do it this way, they do it this way, and they're both working for them. But sometimes if you combine the two, there's a tweak to that. And getting to what you're talking about, the why, the understanding, you're trying to gain the insights, and chart a path forward. Okay, I don't know why. We're going to do this to see if this is it. If this is it, do this, and then repeat and so forth.
And then look at it all and try to figure this thing out, right? Because our third little catchphrase we use a lot is the money channels, right? And it's all about the speed and it's all about the lap times. Yeah. All of the rest of those things are critical, but they're critical because of those two things, right? Drivability and some other things obviously are in there as well, but at the end of the day, it's lap times and speed, right? We want them to go up and we want the other one to go down.
I ranted about this on our Torque show the other day. They're saying, "Oh, it's the track position race," and I said, "Isn't every race a track position race?" I said, "Isn't that how they hand out the trophies?"
Green flag to checkered flag. It's all about everything in between, right?
But I did explain, took the fans, what they mean by that. Basically, it's hard to pass. Yeah, things you can do to change your track position other than passing people is what.
Chris has a question over here that he's asking. Going back to your 1987 championship, you clinched at Del Mar, being a home race, since your dad lived close by, 10 miles, he says. How did that championship rank against the 4 TransAm championships with Roush?
Wow. The early ones are probably more impactful because those are the ones that lead the opportunity. Hello, Chris, by the way. I've known Chris for a long time.
Exactly.
But you're also, when you're young, you're just so ambitious. You almost don't appreciate them at the time because you're just next.
The world is ahead of you, right? So, it's just the next step at some level, but you look back now and it's probably critical, right?
Yeah. And I knew I was, I think I had already signed with Chevrolet at that point. And so that, hometown races, I've never gotten to race. I mean, literally Del Mar was a mile and a half from where I'd been going since I was a kid for summers.
Interesting.
And Long Beach, there, if we want to tell funny stories, for my birthday lunch with my brother and my mom. But I never won a TransAm race at Long Beach. I won the Pro Celeb race there, but I never won one. And one of them, we were in that 96 season, we were almost as dominant as 97. And just to show you how little things can go wrong. And I guess I'll tell the story. Bruce Flanders, who just passed away, the voice of Long Beach, just iconic. And he was
no doubt
so funny, the stories, but he would always walk down the grid, and it was Ford Chevy was the big battle, of course, in TransAm. And so I think that they had inverted the top 5, and I was on pole, so I was starting 5th, and Gentilozzi had qualified 5th, inverted to the pole, and he asked Gentilozzi, he said, "Hey, who's going to win this, Ford or Chevy?" And Gentilozzi's like, "Chevy, Chevy's going to dominate." And he gets back to me, and I said to Bruce, I said, "Well, he's wrong. We're going to win." But I said, I would rather push a Ford than drive a Chevy. So race starts. I quickly worked my way up to the lead, comfortable lead, checking out, and then all of a sudden we picked up this intermittent miss. And I was on 7 cylinders, not 7. And then slowly Jamie Gallus was catching me. And then finally it was purely on 7. He gets around me, and then with, and the other 2nd, 3rd, 4th are catching, 3rd, 4th, and 5th are catching me. But then all of a sudden the yellow comes out, and we're going to end under yellow. And I'm like, well, I'm going to finish 2nd. And coming out of the hairpin, checkered flag in the air, 100 yards away, all of a sudden I smelled this burning smell, and the motor died, and I stopped a couple 100 yards, and I get out, finished last car in the lead lap, and some guy I was literally almost in the exact same place where I'd made that comment. And some guy yells out of the grandstands,
"Oh no,
now's your chance to push that forward, big fella."
You got to give it to him, right? You got to give it to him. Touche.
There was a case where we'd had this misfire show up at before, and we had a short. And when it was short, it was, it was changing the timing, and the exhaust temp was going through the roof. It was melting the tie wrap. First, a plug wire fell against the header, and then the coil wire fell against the header. And so losing a race like that, Binks literally tore the whole car apart, and we found it. And so that's.
Did you ever race with Ron Fellows in your GM days?
I raced against Ron Fellows. Actually, when he was in a Ford, he was with Tom Loy, and then he went to Chevy. And actually, the Chevy operation at that time was actually Operation Beat Kendall. Literally. I heard, from inside GM.
Yeah.
After my accident in 91, where I broke my legs and so forth in the prototype, I came back the next year, and Gurney had leapfrogged us, and the Jag had brought that XJR14, and we weren't very competitive, but it wasn't. I was pretty convinced it wasn't me, but Chevy thought I was damaged goods because I was using a cane to walk.
Yeah,
it looked like I was damaged.
Right.
So I had always had a standing offer from Ford. They used to come to me all the time, and I said, listen, I don't like playing one against the other. And so as long as Chevy makes my deal, I'm going to stay here. And they said, well, if you're ever interested, call us. And so all of a sudden I was, they didn't dump me, but they were basically going to just keep me on almost as a spokesperson and basically being put out to pasture. And so I was 24. Got to get back in a car to prove that I'm still good. And so my former teammate, Max Jones, was running Roush at the time. And they had a new program coming together, an IMSA program. And so I signed with them. I won Daytona in 93, the first time with them, won the championship that year, and then went TransAm. And we became kind of the major thorn in Chevy's side. And when I was hurt, I was begging them, can I go back to TransAm? I said, I'll do a 1-car trailer out of a chaparral with my crew chief and so forth. Like, no, we got guys over there. And it was basically, I was kind of being put in the friend zone by Chevy.
But you had something to prove, right?
It's not going to work. And so it was extra joy kicking their tail. And after about a couple years, I heard Chevy's motorsports objectives this year are to win the Cup championship, to win the IndyCar championship, and to beat you. And so Ron was heading that up.
Okay.
And I was able to. Ron is the guy I rate the highest as the most complete driver of any driver I've ever raced against.
Oh, really?
And
Very, very impressive.
Very strong, healthy, sometimes rivalry.
Yeah.
And but I have massive appreciation for him. I was able to shut him out on the championship. We won 3 in a row, 95, 6, and 7. But Ron was really, really good.
You got to Ron Fellows brings up something in my mind. You've done a number of different forms of motorsports, including some NASCAR runs, and Ron was one of those road course ringers at that time as well, right? You did that, and I listened to a podcast you had with Mark Martin, and you chatted about the Sonoma race where you guys got together, and you don't need to relive that one here. If anybody wants to, go find that and listen to it. It's very, very good. But the question I was going to ask you is you've got that whole road course, which was most of what you did, but I think you even did a couple of oval tracks in the NASCAR Cup Series. What was that like for a road course guy that had been mostly what you had done, getting in a heavy stock car and doing some oval racing?
Well, it was talk about different, and that's the one thing that is hard for people to grasp that haven't done it. And I remember when a number of guys like Dario went Cup racing, and when Paul Tracy was starting to explore it. And Paul used to say, how hard can it be? I said, it's not that it's harder than what you're doing. I said, it's that it's different. Every car I've ever driven, about 90% of it applies to all the other cars I've driven. In a stock car on an oval, it's like half.
Oh, wow.
And it's just stuff happens that you'll spin out and they'll say, what happened? You'll say, I don't have the foggiest idea. I have no idea. And then you'll be running a whole series of laps to say, what did you do on the 5th lap? You're like, same thing I did all the other. They said you were 2/10 quicker. And that's
why?
Why? And so it's just different. And so I think IROC is something that you wanted to get into. That was good for me for my oval stuff because it removed the variable of setup. I wasn't asked to diagnose anything. You couldn't diagnose anything. You couldn't change anything. So it was just focusing on the driving part. When I was in the car on the ovals, I was trying to figure out the driving, and I was trying to figure out the setup in the car. And with that many variables, it's hard to get anywhere. And so now that in 1990, when I did the only ovals that I did, I drove Dale Senior's Bush car, Xfinity car, Bush car. and I was the first person besides Dale Sr. to drive it.
Ah,
And Sr.
very
was basically overseeing my 4-race program,
Okay.
3 Cup, one Busch, on behalf of Chevrolet. Chevrolet had set it up, and so I spent a lot of time with Dale, and he couldn't have been more helpful and more
Very
engaged.
cool.
It was just the memories were great, but also
Fantastic.
try to, demystify some bits of it. And it was hard. It was just so different. And so trying to get onto the trail, and again, the whys, I had so many whys that I couldn't answer,
And no data in those cars, right? I mean, they just had the big NASCAR types gauges and they're, so, but who did you get to race against in the IROC? And you did, there was a number of road courses, but it also was Daytona and Talladega or something, I think, big super speedways too, right?
Yeah, I actually did 6 years of IROC, but I never drove one on a road course because
No.
91 was the first year I got in, and we were gonna race at the Glen, but I got hurt in the prototype right before that. And then in subsequent years, the other 5 years I was in, it was all ovals by that. And so, which in a way it was not as good for me in terms of getting a win, but it was really good for me in terms of learning. And so I would, I got to run Charlotte, Darlington, the big ovals, Talladega, Daytona. And so it was, ran the Brickyard, ran Indy.
Really?
The IROC car. And so, just the memories to when in 91, when I got to Daytona and I walked into the trailer, they had these little lockers. There were 12 of them, 12 drivers. And to see Earnhardt, Wallace, Martin, Kendall, it was like
Kendall. What the?
And it was terrifying. Like I remember my first race ever in the super speedway. This was when they first started really doing the pack stuff with the IROC cars. And you practice 2 or 3 cars at a time only. They have 3 practice cars. So you got a sense of the draft, but not the pack. And when the race started, we were 3 wide for 4 rows. It was just this huge wall. And there was a yellow at about lap 8, and the yellow came out, and I was holding the steering wheel so tight, I literally couldn't unwind my fingers.
Yeah.
I was cramping, and I'm like, all right, deep breath here and just relax and so forth. A big part of racing, this isn't really data, but psychological part of what you're doing is one of the biggest things, the confidence and so forth. And I remember, I don't know how I got onto it, but I said to myself, you'd start saying, I can't do this. Oh my God, these guys are, and I said to myself, at one point, Dale Earnhardt had never driven a car.
Yeah.
And he's got the talent, obviously, but at one point he'd never driven a car. And so laps, and you're as good as anyone you've ever raced against, your experience tells you. Yeah. So just get experience, learn, and don't defeat yourself with the head. And so Bob Wallach, in a later year, here's Bob Wallach, who I drove 962s down the Mole,
badass,
40 miles an hour, and he always wore that open face, and his face was just no emotion, and like one of the braver guys I've ever seen. And when he showed up for his first IROC and he'd done a little bit of practice, we go to lunch, we come back from lunch and we're getting changed. He says, well, it is time to go have the shit scared out of us again.
Did you come to love? Did you see some things that the other people were doing and learn the draft a little bit more? Did you become comfortable? Did you see it and learn?
Yeah, I got decent at the draft. Again, Dale Sr., this was, I knew him from the year before running those 4 races. And one year, and he was always, you'd pull up behind him and he'd be like this. And you're like, oh, he wants me to follow him. I'm like, all right.
Yes, sir.
And pretty soon I'm like, if I always follow him, I'm never beating him. And so Talladega, one of them, late in the race, I was with him the whole race. And then I tried to do something and it didn't work out. And he said, I told you. But I learned a lot from watching him and mostly watching him.
Yeah.
But what I learned more on the drafting tracks, like the
Michigan,
and how much the entry to the corner affected the middle, there they call it 2 different corners. I'm like, it's all one corner. How's that 1 and that's 2? But I just said, okay, the entrance is 1 and the second part is 2. So, but little things about the way you release, how aggressively you release the gas. which is something I'd never thought about before. And how you set the front, you know, you did that as you were, before you turned, as you turned, after you turned. And it was just, it was the subtlety and the nuance was amazing. And you wonder, even when you're watching and you're like, how can Harvick be so good?
Yeah, exactly.
And how can everybody else not quite do it the same, you know? And it's just these little, and you like everything, you kind of start to, it's like a golf swing. All of a sudden you're like, oh, that felt right. And all of a sudden you start to put together, even if you don't understand what's happening, you kind of get a feel, you get a muscle memory of what's working. And it's, but I'm not, you know, I never felt close to feeling like I really had it wired. I ran really well at Michigan. I should have won Michigan a couple years. And I probably would have won Darlington. I was really fast at Darlington. And then I had a plug wire was start.
Well, the bane of your existence here, plug wires. But you talked about earlier that oval track racing, you ended up with this 50% was specialized, and you're running into that right there, right? And then the draft adds even more, I suppose, to the specialty of running it.
Yeah. What I would do is I would show up as early as they'd let me, and I'd practice. And you had the test drivers, Dave Marcus and Jim Otter, and I'd go out with them, and I'd follow them. I'd spend days there. And I'd be going into the race. I was almost always the fastest guy, because the cut guys would, if they would let them, those guys would have started with 0 laps. They didn't want to practice. And they said, you have to run. So they'd come over and do 3 laps. And so I'd be quicker than them for those 3 laps. But once the race settled in, you know, the difference between full fuel and lighter fuel was different. And so I didn't know, I'd been running this one line with always the same fuel load. Then all of a sudden they knew that if it was loose, you did this. If it was tight, you do this. If
down a little lower.
You know, and I didn't know what to do on all that kind of stuff. And so it was, the experience gap really showed up once the races started.
Yeah, you one of the things you mentioned earlier was that serious leg injury at Watkins Glen. It was between you and McDuffie a month later, having his fatal wreck there, horrible. You ended up creating the bus stop, right, or around those instances. Kind of an interesting story, and they've become everywhere, and it's ended up being a critical part of Watkins Glen and other tracks as well. Chicanes and those kind of things. What do you think about the whole safety aspect? Obviously it's good, but you know, by adding some of the different things like that and you being a part of one, do you have any feelings on that?
You know, you say obviously it's good. I think we need to be careful that we don't, you know, neuter the tracks too much. And it's tough to fight, because it's, how do you argue with, well, it's going to be safer this way, it's going to be safer this way. And so safety is a relative thing, and you don't want it to be just reckless and dangerous for no reason. But like, I think some of these, well, there's still some improvements that need to be made. You saw one in the 6 hour at Road Atlanta when Spencer Popelli got sent off down in the S's. It's something that I've been advocating for a long time. I was happy to finally see it, where they had the whole row of tires before the barrier to pick up mass and bleed energy. And so in a high-speed corner, they've tried to move the barriers back. If you can't move them back far enough, you're better off putting them next to the course. Because you think about on ovals, those are higher speed than the road course crashes, and they're okay. And what's happening is you're not generating as much angle.
Yeah, there you go.
And so, you know,
glancing blow for the most part, right?
Yeah,
coming off of them.
And some of these places, you know, I don't have all the answers, but like Nürburgring is a good example. Nürburgring, the barriers are close. There's a little strip, and it's bad for cars if you go off, but it's arguably better for drivers if you can't move the barriers way back. So that's a balance that needs to be struck. You know, I would much rather, now with safer barriers at turn 5 at Watkins Glen, I'd just as soon get rid of the inner loop, put the wall on the track, and make it a safer barrier.
Yeah.
You know,
interesting.
No one's thought about that, but you know, like turn 1 there, where it's this huge paved deal. If you have a brake failure, you're going straight and you're not bleeding an ounce of speed. So that's one where at the very least they should have some rows like they had for Spencer Popelli. That's a different one because you're pointed right at the barrier.
Right at it. Yeah.
But the ones that are just high speed, you need, you know, I'd like to see the barriers closer with safer barriers. It'd be hairier also. That's one of the problems is everybody thinks, oh, I'll try it. Like at these places where they just, in the F1 tracks where it's just painted, There's no consequence. I'll try it flat. Oh, no, it didn't work. I went out over the paint. And that's, I think, one of the things that would separate the guys and girls that are super competent and super brave and confident.
And let's talk about that a little bit. We talked about ovals, road courses, and then that whole nother piece of street circuits, right? And where you don't get some of that. You watch Formula One now, and they're docking laps because you put 4 tires in the paint or something, right? And you get a street circuit, you get your Long Beaches, or some of those things where the speed, you still have to drive, you still have to do it as fast as you can, but there is no no give if you miss it, right? So what do you think about that street circuit thing? Did you enjoy street circuits?
I loved them. And again, I try not to be the guy that says it was better before, but the harder you could make it, the better. And so Long Beach, some of these places where Monaco is one of the few, and you see it in places where there's a barrier on the inside rather than where they've pulled the barrier back and put an FIA curb.
Yeah.
When it's a barrier on the inside and it's a commitment corner, you've got to be, the closer you get, the more speed there is, but the higher the penalty. And so it's just total commitment. And so I get it. It's like, and if you hit the inside wall, you literally hit the outside wall before you've realized that you even hit the inside.
Bang, 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 right?
So I'm a fan, as long as the cars are safe enough, that you make it hard and a little bit hairy, in that regard. There's pros and cons to it. You can't see as far around the corner. The flaggers become more important. You could have, stack ups. And so, it's not a simple thing, but with the cars being as safe as they are, I err towards the harder you can make it, the better. Yeah.
The 2013, and I think in 2000, if I remember right, looking at some notes, you were able to go with Mopar and go to the 24-hour Le Mans. And again, an endurance racing fan personally. What was that like for you? Did you really enjoy it back there?
I didn't really enjoy it. I enjoyed it. I was kind of in a situation that wasn't optimal. Namely, I'd come out of retirement. I knew I needed a bunch of time to get sharp. We ran the last 4 races of 2012. I wasn't as sharp as I needed to be. I wasn't as quick as I needed to be. So I understood the move to put Bomarito in. Bomarito is definitely the right call. But going to the third driver, I was only going to drive 4 races that year, and there was going to be huge gaps between races. And so I knew that was the opposite of what I needed. And so during that offseason, I actually tried to opt out of my last 2 years. Oh. And they agreed, but then they said, it came to Detroit, and Ralph Gilles took me to dinner, and he said, "You got to reconsider. Come on." Ralph, I said, "I totally get the decision, but I said, I just think it's going to be harder for me. I need more laps, not less. And I don't think I'm going to enjoy it because I don't like being off the
obviously.
pace.
Yeah, obviously.
Only a little bit, and so he said, "Come on." I said, "Well, we're going to Le Mans. How bad can it be?" I said, "Yeah, you're right." And so, and it was an unbelievable experience that I appreciated more. I referenced earlier that that you don't appreciate as much when you're young. You're just worried about what's next. And so all the parts of it, the parade, the tradition, all the weird things that happen on site there, the quiet day on Friday, practice starting at 8 p.m., for the practice days and running until midnight, all those things appreciated, but it was just such a huge ass. That place is so fast, so hairy, that I was never really as comfortable as I wanted to be. And one of the stories, if we're going to tell stories, there was a bunch of not red flags. They didn't red flag. Alan Simonson was killed on the 4th lap in our class in Aston. So that added level of heaviness and in your face how hairy it was. But then they had there was a lot of rain and there was a lot of guardrail repairs. There was a bunch of really long yellows. And so I got in the car once in the middle of the night under yellow, and then I'm going around, and then it starts raining, and I said, "That's raining." And they're like, "Is it raining everywhere?" I said, "No, just here and here." They're like, "Let us know when it's raining everywhere." I said, "Okay." A little bit later, I said, "It's raining everywhere." They said, "Hard?" I said, "Well, no, not that hard, not hard." And they're like, "Okay, let us know if it's raining hard everywhere." I'm like, "Well, it's raining hard everywhere now." And I said, "And I've noticed everyone has stopped for rains except me."
But me.
Including my teammate. So they said, we're worried that we're not going to have enough rain tires, and we're trying to save some. Can you do it? I said, I said, you can, I guess you can do anything really. It's not raining that hard, but it's wet. It's wet. And so, and because we had some driveline concerns, we were not running traction control for that race. Because of the cuts, they were worried it was causing some driveline shocks. And so, and they have 3 pace cars there because it's such a long lap. And so I'm now behind one of the pace cars. Everyone's behind me on reins. I'm on getting ready for this restart. I said, this is awesome. And I was just, I was shitting myself.
Exactly.
And, I didn't crash. Obviously, I gave up. I mean, I gave up a ton of time. And I'm thinking in my head, I said, has Audi ever said that to Alan McNish? I don't want to drag the team, and I don't know the logistics. So you can't have, if it rains all 24 hours, you can't have enough tires for everyone. So I don't know how that works, but it was an odd moment. And then it finally started drying out, and I finally started going. I actually had probably my best laps of the whole time, right into the stop. And then I had a tire fail right at the end of the Mulsanne.
Oh,
and just when I was getting comfortable, really going in deep there. Anyways, and I went into the gravel, and then I had to limp back. They pulled me out and I had to limp back on a flat in the middle of the night through the Porsche curves. And they're like, slower. It's going to tear up the bike.
Wow.
It was not my favorite stint, but it's a great memory and a great story. So
I'm glad you got to go do that. That would be interesting. One last thing before we close it out: sim racing. I found a video of you doing a lap and talking about the new Daytona road course that the NASCAR guys used. Do you enjoy sim racing? Is it something that you enjoy to do?
I do enjoy it. This goes way back to when I was in school at UCLA and I was racing when the first the good computer games where you could adjust setup and so forth came out. I literally wouldn't let myself do it. They weren't sims. It was more of a game.
Yeah.
Because I said, this is all I'll do. I will not study. That's all I'll do. And
so, your personality, right? You'd be in there.
Kind of carried over. I've never really gotten heavy into them. CXC, who makes some of the best simulators in the world, Chris Considine, is a friend of mine, and I've known him since before he started it. And so I get on their rigs a fair amount. I'd love to be able to dedicate some time, and it would be a really fun thing to do. Park your pride and just go do some racing. I've done a few. They have a annual Pro Celeb one that I've taken part in, and I enjoy it. My foot injuries. I don't have any articulation.
Okay.
My ankles, very little. So the brake feel is the hardest thing in sims anyways. And I have trouble with that.
And now you're having to use your whole leg and knee instead.
Okay. Yeah. And so, but I think it's an unbelievable tool. The visual part of it in terms of learning tracks and it's a skill set, just like, being able to do your own data. If I was telling a young driver the talent stack you need, not only there's all these business aspect sides of it, marketing and so forth and social media, but I think there's going to be driver selections made on who's better in a sim.
Wow.
Ultimately, it's the fastest guy on the racetrack that's going to get the nod. But if two are really close and some people just have a better feel for it, calibration, because a lot of the setup work. And so being good on a sim, I think, is going to actually be a valuable job skill.
Interesting. One last quick question about that. That one video I seen, you probably know which one it was from, that sim company. Was that a one taker, or did you have to take a few edits to get your good lap in?
You saw the Daytona Roval.
The Daytona Roval, yes.
That took a few, and the hard part, Chris kept saying to me, I went and practiced a little bit, and then it was, as you could tell, it was super slick as the race showed, and I kept trying to charge, and Chris is like, listen, we don't have the lap time, nobody can but I would find myself trying to go, and then I'd make it, and then I'd wreck in the bus stop, and say, oh, restart. And so
there was a couple of takes.
Now, I did another one that hasn't come out yet. I did the Charlotte Roval in an RSR for the upcoming IMSA race, which we'll use on the Torque Show as our track. I'll tell you what, an RSR on that track, those cars, the GT3, and is going to be like, it's like on fast forward.
Wow.
And Mike Shanks said on our show last week, he said, there is not going to be a car at the end of that race without Arlington stripes, Charlotte stripes on the car. He said it's, and I heard that Porsche wrecked some cars in their test. So I think it's going to be, and so I got to do a lap there. That one, good. Because there was grip, actually went quite a bit better.
Perfect. I'm going to share the screen back to our presentation as we get ready to close this up. I appreciate your time. The this is a different kind of a one than what we've done. Obviously, I had some great time. We had some questions we didn't get to. Thanks everybody for putting some of those in. We were able to get a couple of them. I was a little indulged myself with some of my own questions, right, Tommy? But but I enjoyed it. Thank you very much. This will go on to YouTube. As everybody knows that's been watching some of these, we'll get it up within an hour or so, and send out the note. We have a bunch of them here. This is number 119 that we'll have up there with all of these webinars, plus tons of other training classes that we've done online. So everybody look for those.
I will say, anyone that didn't get their question answered, if you send it to me on Twitter, I'll answer them there. So
very
Tommy
good.
11 on Twitter. So
we'll have that link here in just a second on the contact page. If great that he's going to go ahead and do that for you guys. Thank you. Customer support company is what we are here at AIM, and we just happen to sell racing electronics. That you look forward to seeing everybody out at the track. The next webinar, this is one of the things we always try to do here right at the end. We're going to have on next Tuesday, we're going to Peter Krause. Somebody's done 5 or 6 different webinars with us so far. He's going to come back in and we're going to talk about those SmartyCams, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how to get that overlay to be, really work for you, tips and tricks in that. Peter's going to do that on Tuesday. So everybody make sure that you drop by and follow the next Tuesday one as well. So again, thank you very much, Tommy. I appreciate it. There was not a whole lot we could offer you, but I sure appreciate you taking a little bit of your time and chatting with our guys. There's some contact information for you on this slide. If anybody would like to ask Tommy a question afterwards, there's his Facebook page, his Twitter, Instagram. Of course, my email address is there if you have any other questions about some of the other stuff we talked about. I appreciate it, Tommy. Is there anything else you'd like to add as we kind of close this one down?
No, just keep doing what you do. If I get into the sim stuff, I'll have to get up to speed on your stuff, and maybe it's not too late for me to learn how to do my own job.
There you go. And we'll be here to help you in any way we can. So thanks, Tommy. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Look for this on YouTube a little bit later, and we'll see you guys all next Tuesday. Thanks again, Tommy.
Cheers. Yep.